Here we are for a second grimdark review in 1 week. I'm Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon, The Blackest Heart, The Lonesome Crown, all published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Today, we will be reviewing Prince of Thorns by Mark Lawrence, book number 1 in the Broken Empire trilogy. I mean, it's why I wore the Prince shirt. Get it? Prince of Thorns? Prince? I'm trying my best. It's the best my production crew could come up with. You know, we don't have a lot of fancy CGI graphics here. We don't have a lot of explosions. Once in a while we have an explosion or two. We've had fires. We've had accidents. We've had swords fall into my feet. We've had kittens destroying the set. But this is the first time we've had a Prince shirt. Anyway, you get it. I'm done. We always review the covers. Let's review the cover first. I mean, this is my entire Mark Lawrence collection. I've got 3 trilogies of his. This trilogy, this trilogy, this trilogy. I'll eventually review all of those books, plus whatever else he writes in the future, plus everything else in my library, some 3,000 book reviews we'll eventually have up on this channel. Prince of Thorns, the cover. Oh yeah, this is painted by an illustrator named Jason Chan. And I think, you know, I love graphic design, I love illustration. I think this is spectacular. This is eye-catching. This is one of the reasons this book sold so many copies. It's because that cover is dope. Man, you just don't get better than that. Look at the font they use. Look at this great swordsman with his cloak billowing out behind him like bat wings. And all the stuff going on here in the foreground. Oh my gosh, it's just delicious. Absolutely smashing. Love it. And you know, the other covers are good too. But we'll review those individually when the time comes. Mark Lawrence and Joe Abercrombie. They're known as the Lords of Grimdark. You know, I've reviewed some Joe Abercrombie books on the channel. You can go type in my name, Brian Lee Durfee, and then type in Joe Abercrombie. Those reviews will magically appear on your YouTube. Because I'm not going to provide a link. This is the first Mark Lawrence book that I have reviewed. I read these as they've come out. This came out in like 2010 or something. I bought it, read it then. I'm slowly rereading through them, you know, just for the review channel. And I think Joe Abercrombie, Mark Lawrence, there's no denying it. They are the Lords of Grimdark. These are the guys that brought Grimdark to the forefront of the masses. They're the most popular authors in the Grimdark movement. They're similar yet not similar. And we're going to go over some of that. We're going to talk about that. You know, yesterday I dropped a review of Lord Fowl's Bane by Stephen Donaldson. If you watched that review, you saw that there's a part of that review where I talk about some pretty brutal things happening, some pretty objectionable and brutal things happening at the very start of that book, Lord Fowl's Bane by Stephen Donaldson. And a lot of people get turned off and throw the book across the room right then at that point, and they don't finish the series, and they never read anything that Stephen Donaldson has ever written since. The reason I wanted to review this book right after Lord Fowl's Bane is because not since Lord Fowl's Bane by Stephen Donaldson has there been a more controversial book come out than The Prince of Thorns. One of those books where within the first 3 or 4 chapters, people are tossing it across the room in disgust because they just don't like what's going on. Particularly, they don't like what the main character is doing because he's a bad dude. No, he's not just a bad dude. He's a bad kid. This book is told in the first person. If I had to do one drawback, but it's not really a drawback because it's kind of the strength of the story, and I understand why. I don't like first-person narratives. This is a first-person narrative told through the eyes and voice of our main character, George Ancroft, or Jorge, George, J-O-R-G, I don't know how you pronounce it. I just pronounced it Jorg. Jorg? I think it was Jorg is the way I pronounced it. You can pronounce it however you like. Or if you've listened to the audible.com and you've heard the narrator pronounce it, maybe drop in the comments below how we're supposed to pronounce the name George. Jorg, Georgie, Georgie Porgy, Georgie, George, Jorge. I don't know. But I pronounced it Jorg Ancraft was the main character, and it's told through his perspective. And he's just a young kid. He's only 13 years old in the first few chapters of this book. Another thing that was kind of a little wonky was there's a lot of flashbacks from when he's 13. The main story takes place when he's 13 years old, but there's a lot of flashback scenes to when he is 9 years old. Which, so now we've got two strikes against us on this book, because I don't like flashbacks, and I don't like first-person narrative. However, Mark Lawrence is such a good writer that it doesn't matter. I mean, this was fantastic. He utilized those two storytelling techniques to his advantage, and the advantaged this book in a lot of good ways. The first-person narrative is needed in this book, because and therein lies the horror of this book. And in the first few chapters, our main 13-year-old protagonist, who's telling us this story, does some horrific things, including murder, torture, rape, pillaging, among like probably a dozen other really bad things. He treats everyone he meets bad. He's an angry young 13-year-old boy for many reasons, and that's why it's interesting to see the story through his perspective. An interesting way to go, to put us in the head of a sociopath, a fantasy sociopath. I mean, people read fantasy for the unicorns and talking animals, and all of the bright little fairies. They don't read it for a 13-year-old bully who's pillaging and raping every village he comes across. No, they don't. That's why people were throwing this. There are 3 chapters in, they're like, oh my God, this is awful. This is the worst character I've ever read. And they throw it. And I'm not making this up. This is well documented in review after review after review after review. However, the people that love it, like me, can overlook that stuff and try to figure out what the greater themes and what the greater storytelling is going on. Not only that, but man, this dude, Mark Lawrence, can write a book. If you want some of the best writing advice you can get, go to Mark Lawrence's webpage and look up some of the, so what he does is he takes self-published novels and he critiques the first few chapters, right? Now, he does it with the permission of the author. And sometimes the author will ask him to do it. And so he will take some amateur writing and he will dissect it and let you know word by word what's not working in the story for the first few chapters. And my gosh, that is one of the best tutorials on how to write that I've ever seen on the internet. So if you want to go to Mark Lawrence's website and look up some of those writing critiques, I think they're just listed under writing critiques somewhere on his website. He does like about 24 of these writing critiques, and you read through them, and man, you'll learn how to write great opening scenes just from him dissecting poorly written opening scenes. Because Mark Lawrence is a fantastic writer. He's one of the best that I've read. His writing, I mean, these books are not as big as Joe Abercrombie, or they're not as big as most epic fantasies, because he writes in such a style that the word count is low, a very sparse language, but yet every word counts. Every word is filled with meaning. Every bit of dialogue is witty, sharp, on point, gruesome. Makes you cringe in horror sometimes. Makes you laugh out loud sometimes. There's a scene. Okay, why is Jorg Ancraft such an angry young 13-year-old boy? Well, he watched his family killed, mother and sisters killed, when he was 9 years old. And we get flashbacks to that, and that's brutal. He's a brutal boy. He's seen brutal things. I work in the Utah State Prison. I've done so for 13 years. I've seen these gang members, and I can... This is like a gang member. This is like this. You could throw this in any inner city in the country with any white supremacist or Norte or Sereno or Blood or Crip, and you would get the same kind of character almost, because a lot of these people, they grow up with parents that just aren't good, and they just don't have a chance from begin with, and they grow up as angry young men. And this is sort of what we're seeing here. This is kind of like what a gangster would be in a fantasy world. These are gangsters in the fantasy world. These are people that grew up with parents who were gangsters, parents who were evil, parents who didn't teach them anything, parents who treated them poorly, parents who killed their siblings and killed everything, and just awful parents. And so he's an angry young man, and so that's all he knows, and that's all he learns. And there's a scene where that's pretty much the plot of the story, to be honest with you. It's kind of like a revenge quest tale where he goes in search of his father. And then there's about halfway through the book, he actually does find his father. And that scene is magnificent. That scene is crazy good. I loved everything about that scene. And, you know, what else was I going to say? Oh, yeah, just a kid with major daddy issues. And told through his perspective. It is crazy, crazy, brutal, grim. And one of the other things I wanted to mention about this before I wrap this up, I don't give plot spoilers. I just give general gushing reviews of books I like. Generalized. One of the things that I loved about this book was the, oh man, it escaped me. It escaped me what it was I loved about this book. Gosh dang it. It's going to come to me once oh, I remember the Sword of Shannara, right? Remember how the Sword of Shannara sort of had, it was a fantasy land, but yet you kind of, as you read through the book, you understood that maybe this was sort of like a post-apocalyptical America. Well, this is a post-apocalyptical Europe, and there's even a map in here that looks suspiciously like Europe, if you hold it a certain way. And as you read along, you get the feeling that this is some sort of post-apocalyptical Europe that Jorg Ankrath is running around through. And so, because once in a while you just get hints that there might have been some old technology kind of laying around here and there. And it's not really evident in this book, but in the later books it sort of plays out a little bit more. So anyway, what do I think of The Prince of Thorns, book number 1 of The Broken Empire? Love it. Love it every bit as much as I loved Joe Abercrombie's First Law trilogy. I think this is great. It's a faster read. It's a fun read. Yeah, I mean, Joe Abercrombie's a little bit more wordy, a little bit more garrulous with his descriptions. Mark Lawrence is a little more less wordy, less garrulous with his descriptions. I give this a good 9 out of 10. 9 out of 10. The first-person narrative works well. The flashbacks work well. And the gruesomeness, if you can get over it, I understand if you don't want to read gruesomeness. That's fine. You don't have to read these books. But if you're fine with the gruesomeness and realities of war, you'll be okay with this book. 9 out of 10.